Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the show. Actions, consequences. For a long time now, there's been a deliberate campaign by media outlets, by politicians, not just confined to the Conservatives by any means, to demonise, to scapegoat migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. Very convenient in a society as crisis-ridden as ours, where people lack properly funded public services, where they're stuck on social housing waiting lists, where their wages have stagnated and fallen, where there's a lack of secure jobs, to blame or redirect many of the problems that exist in society at some of the most vulnerable people on the face of the earth. And that rhetoric has become ever uglier, particularly, of course, on the Conservative front benches and with Home Secretaries who, I'm afraid, only get ever uglier in their rhetoric. Suella Braverman, of course, the latest one, almost a parody of a hateful politician. 2 days ago, there was a far-right riot in Knowsley in Merseyside, and this centred on a hotel providing refuge for asylum seekers. Let's just have a look first at some of the scenes which were taken on the mobile phones of what was happening in Knowsley.
Loads here, mate. Absolutely loads. Big turnout. All on the main street. Thousands here. God don't let you near it. They're all hiding inside. Proper good mob here.
I mean, you can see that's a very, very significant crowd. That's a very large crowd of people who of course, gathered there. Let's just see how those scenes then later degenerated.
Here's the plug. Here's the plug. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not fucking running away from you. Let's have it! Fucking stupid little non-protected cunts!
So there were reports of fireworks going off, smashed glass, locks flying, and clashes with the police. And you can hear what the chant was to give you a flavour, of course, of what the political, I suppose, orientation of this mob was. So they're yelling there, get them out, get them out, get them out. Ugly scenes indeed. And I suppose the danger is, with a very, I'm afraid, well-founded danger, is that this is a flavour of worse to come. We've already seen in this country, for example, a rise in far-right violence. Of course, we had the murder of Joe Cox by a far-right terrorist back in 2016. We had an attempted far-right murder of another Labour MP, Rosie Cooper. There have been a rise in far-right terror plots. Striking that Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has suggested that there's too much focus on the threat of the far right at the exclusion of Islamist terrorism. But you can see, whether it be in this riot or indeed these terrorist acts, well, you can see where things could be heading, not least given the sorts of rhetoric we've heard from newspapers and from politicians for a very, very long time, with a lack of a counterweight. I don't think many of us would argue that the Labour front bench, its current incarnation, are doing very much to push back on some of this viciously ugly rhetoric. Now, later we're going to be talking to Benny Hunter, who is an anti-fascist youth worker who spends a lot of time researching the far right, the rise of fascism, and also is very much embedded in political organising, centering on defending migrants and refugees, to give kind of broader context and so on. But first, I'm really honoured to bring in Kolbassia Haossou. Now, Kolbassia works with the brilliant campaigning organisation Freedom from Torture. He came here as a refugee from Chad in 2005 and actually as a torture survivor. Kolbassia, it's such an honour to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It really is my honor to be here too, and thank you very much for having me.
No, honestly, honour's all mine. Can you just tell us firstly about your story? Tell us about what happened in Chad and what forced you to leave, basically.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think first I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but I'm just gonna give you a little bit of what happened. I was held in a military camp where I was tortured for about seven months there, and then I had opportunity to flee and to escape. I was in that military camp, so I flee, and from that moment, for me, the most important thing is to be as far as possible from the military, so that I'm not going to be captured again. So I managed kind of to move to the neighboring country, and from there it was really important for me to put at least one or two countries between myself and my country, so that I have a better chance not to be captured. And through the process of looking of a way of getting somewhere, I managed, to get money and give people that will help you get somewhere else. And then I paid those people, and then they launched the process of getting me somewhere. But let me tell you that I did not have a control of everything. But the only thing, just give them the money, and then you just wait in a limbo, waiting what will be the next step. And from there, so I started the journey with them, to put me in a ship, and then we did travel, and for a few months, and then we get into the UK. I did not know the UK, honestly, but some other people speaking English. Initially, I was thinking maybe the US or the Canada, because we did travel for a very long time. So I lost count of time, and I lost because I wasn't. I was just hidden in a container somewhere. So I didn't know what is happening. I cannot see, and I'm just let out when I was let out. So then I end up in the UK, and then I started the process of seeking asylum. And to my biggest surprise, I was put in immigration detention center straight away. Since when I presented myself in seeking, that was really, I mean, it was a really difficult part of my life, because I felt that I have made a sacrifice. I have journeyed for very, very long, for really, really a long. And some of the journey I walked, and there a moment where I starve, and there's a moment where, I mean, when I was with those smugglers, they could have done anything with me. They could have sold me as a slave and everything. And finding myself in that position, I was just looking at my life, and I was thinking that my life's gonna spiral back to square zero again. It was really, really tough, for me, because I felt that I had reached somewhere where I'm gonna start a new beginning. But that wasn't that wasn't the case in the beginning.
Can you tell me about your experience in an immigration detention center?
On immigration, it's really horrendous, feeling to be in that immigration detention. Compared to other people that maybe stay there 6 months, 7 months, and year. I did not stay long in that, but I could not sleep. Constantly, I'm just thinking what's gonna happen to me next, and constantly I was just crying so all the time, because I see the ending. Really, I see my life ending, and I I feel sorry for myself. I felt that I done so much sacrifices, and then coming here, and then I'm gonna be facing that reality again. I really felt sorry, and it's like my life was flashing back, and I was accusing myself of a lot of things. Why this and why that? I didn't do wrong in the first place to be tortured, and I didn't do anything wrong to come and seeking protection. I didn't do any wrong to be put in immigration detention center. Why is happening to me? And at that moment where everything really just, it's like everything just collapsed in my mind. My mind completely broke. I started having really strong headache. I was bleeding constantly. I have a nightmare, cannot sleep, cannot eat. I have my stomach that is really burning. There is a lot of things that are happening that I really could not understand. What is happening, what is happening to me. And luckily for me, I wasn't deported, and I was released from immigration detention center. And then I was referred to freedom from torture, that helping torture survivors. And then I start process of rehabilitation at freedom from torture. Then,
I mean, how did you feel that you're someone who survived torture? You came here hoping to find safety, and then you were treated like that by the British state. How did that feel?
oh, and honestly, at that moment, I really, really thought that the United Kingdom and the regime that I flee, they are connected, that they are working together. Now, I felt that the United Kingdom cannot communicate it back, to the people that I'm fleeing, that I reach here, and then they agreed, okay, then they're gonna send me really back. I was paranoid absolutely at that moment. I really felt that there is a communication between them that is happening. Otherwise, why? Why me? What I did wrong? I could not understand what I did wrong. I know that I came here. I didn't come with visa, but I came because my life was in danger. And I with the idea that they can listen to my story, and if they want to make a check, they can check, and then they will give me the protection. That was uh, my understanding. But I was uh, honestly, because prior to that, I'm telling you that I lost faith in anything official, anything government, and then all those kind of thing. And that experience proved me only right, that you cannot trust official, you cannot trust government, whether that the government that torture you or the government that you're seeking protection from.
When you hear comments, the likes of Suella Braverman talking about an invasion on the southeast coast, when you hear or see newspapers talking in very inflammatory terms about refugees, about asylum seekers, how does that make you feel, given your background and what you've gone through?
I think it make my heart really bleed, honestly speaking. I mean, I had a really tough time here in the UK in the beginning because I was homeless, and all those kind of thing. But one thing that I really cannot really fault, people that people in the community, um, I mean, they show me love. At Freedom from Torture, from the beginning, people show me love. For me, they're strangers. I don't know them. Why they want to care for me? I was really surprised and struck by the welcoming, the respect, the love that people were showing to me. I said, why is that? I wasn't believing really why people treating me the way it is. And in the community is the same thing. First, I love football. I love Arsenal, and I go into the pub watching football, and then I met guy as well as Arsenal fan, and he started talking to me, and and so on and so and so, and then asking me, do I love playing football? I say yes. And then the guy that I don't know, and then says next thing, oh, invite me, come, can you come and come? We have a football team that you can play with us. That's my first interaction with really local people at that moment. Let me call them local people. And it's completely changed my attitude, toward people. I start believing that there's good on people. All right. And this country give me so much, to build the life that I built today, to be the person that I am today. But listening to Braverman, listening to Priti Patel, and it's starting from David Cameron and all those kind of things, and year on year, the narrative just becoming really damning, really negative, hostile toward refugees and asylum seeker people, vulnerable people that come in here seeking protection, seeking help from us. I mean, we are not asking anything. I always say, you have to listen to somebody.
Mhm.
You have a process in place, you have a system, you have a policy in place. If you feel that the person provide you the information to give them the protection, you give them. If you feel that the person not providing you the information, not to give them, you feel that the person does not require protection, so you don't. But you need to treat people with respect and dignity. We are all human beings. That's all what we require.
Yeah.
We are not expecting people coming here that they're gonna get protection. Those that require protection will be given. Those not. But we need to treat people with respect and dignity, and that's what this country is supposed to stand for.
When you saw, as I showed, those images of a far right riot in Knowsley, I mean, what was your when you heard about those events? What was your thoughts? What was your kind of gut reaction, I suppose, to what you saw?
I think honestly, I don't know. 2 days ago, I wake up like 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know, straight away I went to Twitter and then I saw Liverpool were trending, and I didn't know why Liverpool was trending. I thought that maybe they sacked their manager. So then I went there. That's completely something else that shocked me,
Yeah.
and I could not watch it long because straight away awake in that moment where I was so vulnerable. I felt at that moment really when I was in the immigration detention center, all those feelings just come up again, because straight away put myself in the feet of those asylum seekers that being attacked at that moment, and having that group of people shouting, and the fire. It completely really it really broke me. I felt really really sorry for those people, and I have felt that they have done nothing wrong, and nobody gonna do anything to protect them there. If they attack, they're just gonna die, or they're gonna be beaten badly. And what are we turning into? Is where it's like lawless country now. People just wake up in the morning, decided to take justice, or to take the law in their hand, and our leaders, the government, and standing there, not having a robust um, response to that. It's really shameful.
For those who want to stand by refugees, asylum seekers in this poisonous climate, what's your what would you like to ask? What's the best things people can do to push back at this kind of really ugly, poisonous tidal wave of hate? I suppose. What would you encourage people to do?
I think one thing that I really want to say, to people is that we as a people, right, we have a power to make our community and the society and the country welcoming and respect to people. Government is we that put the government in power, and with our power of vote, we can tell them exactly what we want them to do. Because I'm feeling that they're telling us what, instead of we telling them, is the government that telling us to do the thing. And I think we need to come really together, and as a community we need to stand together to protect people, vulnerable people, asylum seekers and the refugees, so that they cannot be threatened. And also, I think one thing that I really quickly also want to say is that, and the government doing those things, they think that they're gonna deter people. But when you're fleeing, when you know that your life in danger, crossing a channel, crossing a river, that is no danger for you. you will do that no matter what. And coming and doing all those is not going to deter people. We're just creating more of the dangerous route that people need to take, even more danger to put people on that. So us coming together, supporting our community, I think the best way forward for us as a humanity.
Kolbassia, really appreciate your thoughts there. Really very moving, but also I think giving a bit of context and a bit of humanity, which this so-called debate obviously has deliberately been stripped of. So it's real honor to have you. So thanks for joining us today. And people also, just so people are aware, you can follow Kolbassia on social media. So in fact, we have, because we have to spell it out otherwise. Here we go. So people can see on the screen unless you're listening on the podcast. But do follow Kolbassia Haossou on Twitter, for example. But Kolbassia, really appreciate it, and thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Take care. Speak soon. Take care. Bye. Great stuff there from Kolbassia. I should have said, by the way, I forgot to say, do press like on if you're watching live. Click on the YouTube link. If you're not watching on YouTube, press like and do subscribe. And you can support the show on Super Chat, as people are doing, like Taranair Amadi Parker. I'll thank you all at the end. And if you'll put questions as well to the next guest, we'll do that. Your support will enable us to do the documentaries we've got lined up. People have submitted on patreon.com/OwenJones84 the documentary ideas you'd like us to get on with making. So we will be doing that very shortly. I'm going to bring in Benny Hunter now, who is a youth worker, anti-fascist, lots of various things, campaigner. How you doing, Benny?
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, first I just want to show you this reaction from Suella Braverman, who we discussed there, who is, I'm afraid to say, the Home Secretary. I condemn the appalling disorder in Knowsley last night. The alleged behaviour of some asylum seekers is never an excuse for violence and intimidation. Pretty sickening stuff, I would say. Deliberately trying to inject, I suppose, the pretext for the riot and in a sense legitimize it. So I just want your thoughts just on what she said there.
Yeah, I mean, in one regard, it feels sort of like victim blaming. In another way, it sort of feels a bit like sort of like a wink, nudge, nudge towards the people that have been involved in this. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, particularly. We had an incident in the last few months where a person firebombed a processing centre for migrants in Dover. And I remember at the time she also responded in a similar fashion. And I guess, when you're Suella Braverman and your base is the hard edge of the right of politics, this is how she would respond. And this is, her way of sort of ducking out of the conversation as well, because, as you've already discussed, so much of what has happened in the last few days has come as a result of the rhetoric of people like the Home Secretary, so much of the right wing in terms of politics, but also in the media and in the government.
What, from your example, from your experience as a researcher of the far right and so on, how would you, just as you see it, the context behind this particular riot? I mean, to what degree do you think this was specifically organised and instigated by far right extremists? What do you think the role of social media maybe also is in this? I mean, what's your just thoughts about this specific event?
Yeah, it's hard to sort of dig apart all the different pieces from what we've seen online. But it appears that there was a large group of people here. Reports have been suggesting around 400 people turned out to protest outside of this hotel. There was also a peaceful counter-protest there that involved anti-racist and refugee organisations. But in the lead up to this big protest, there had been far-right groups such as Patriotic Alternative and Britain First who'd been visiting this hotel in particular in the weeks previous. The weekend before, Patriotic Alternative had been leafleting the local area with leaflets which read, making claims about 5-star hotels for migrants while Brits freeze. And then there were individuals at this that were noted to have been at this protest who are prominent far-right and anti-immigrant figures. But it also has to be said that it did seem like there was a considerable local connection here. You can hear in the kind of the accents of the people who were shouting in a lot of the videos, these are some local people were there present too, and it probably isn't true to say that it was just outsiders being shipped in. But I think that what seems likely is that the flames of this incident have been fanned over some time and have been pushed forward by organized far-right groups with the objective of creating this sort of situation. The Suites Hotel where this took place featured on a list of roughly 90 hotels that have alleged to be housing asylum seekers, and that list had been shared quite widely in far-right spaces in the past few weeks. And this particular demo was the details of which were shared online in chat groups, Patriotic Alternative chat groups, and groups that support Tommy Robinson. So I think, yes, I think that there were probably individuals there who had, maybe particular anti-migrant views, but weren't themselves involved in far-right groups. I think it was a combination of those two groups that were there, and the results of which are pretty shocking, pretty horrifying. Burning a police van and throwing fireworks. I can only imagine, just listening to the really moving things that Kolbassia was saying about his experience as an asylum seeker in the UK, just how horrifying and terrifying that would be for someone, for anyone, but for someone who's come here, and I think something that Kolbassia was saying about the things that he sacrificed in order to make that journey. So many of these people will be feeling that they've gone through hell, maybe in their own countries or on their journeys to the UK, but that the UK is this place that once they get to it, they'll be safe and that they will be able to rebuild their lives. And that is often a hope that drives people and allows them to overcome adversity and to overcome trauma. And then for them to arrive here and to experience that violence, that visceral, hateful violence, it's so damaging. It would be so damaging to the people inside, and it's so damaging to society. Just rips apart these communities. And I think also a lot of the blame can also be put in the current situation that we have, whereby asylum seekers are placed in hotels by this government, which is in a way so unnecessary when they could be living with us in our communities.
In terms of, I guess this is the pretext for this far-right violence is age old. I mean, if you look at lots of different contexts, so for example, take the United States after the Civil War and Reconstruction and so on, and the KKK organized and agitated often under the banner of protect our women and girls. And it was this idea of black men being a violent sexual predators. So there's a film called The Birth of a Nation in 1915, which was one of the first big popular films, which very much pushed this narrative. And it's this use of the very real problem that exists of male violence towards girls and women to target particular minorities. In the United States, it was black people and used to deprive them of their rights. In the American South, we see it in the anti-trans backlash today as well. It strikes me with Knowsley, that's what you see here, which is often to seize on particular examples, which are then extrapolated in order to justify targeting an entire minority, often by far right elements, I have to say, who within their own ranks have sexually predatory men. And then obviously they're using, they're trying to target minorities, claiming that they're all collectively threats to women and girls. But that is a big part of this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right. And I think it's interesting, the point you made there about the anti-trans kind of protests as well. We saw that in London even this weekend, that the Patriotic Alternative were involved in organising to protect society from LGBT identities, and it seems to be this issue of protecting children, protecting women is sort of used as the basis for racism and bigotry and xenophobia. I think it's also interesting that as recent as I think last week or 2 weeks ago in Dublin, this very similar situation occurred in which there was far-right groups agitating around this issue of there having been a rumour of sexual violence perpetrated by someone who may have been from a refugee background. This was actually misinformation. The police have come out and said that there's no basis for any of this, but as a result of this agitation, there was then violence perpetrated against a migrant encampment. A report in the Irish Times said that there was men with dogs and sticks and baseball bats attacking people who were homeless in Dublin. So I think, we've seen this happen time and time again, not just in the UK, as you've said, also in historical context, but also, I don't know if you remember previously that incident that happened in, I think it was Germany, in the kind of period after the Syrian civil war, when a large number of people had come to Europe from Syria. And there was incidents where that were later found to, I believe, be misinformation. And this claim that migrants are particularly, violent and pose a risk to women is sort of a myth, really. I think that's been perpetuated by far right groups and by, in large part, also by our media, our press, far right rags. Yeah.
How much do you think there's a danger of far right elements gaining genuine traction amongst certain working class communities, and how much is there a failure on the left and the Labour movement to organise properly in those communities to offer a counterweight?
I think it was interesting that so many people, responded to this with shock that this had happened in a community that's very close to Liverpool, because I think people associate Liverpool as this sort of bastion of left-wing kind of politics. And I just think it goes to show the real risk that there is in our communities across the UK, whereby people who, I don't know, I necessarily believe that, people who attend a far right protest can be persuaded to think otherwise if we had, a stronger left-wing movement. But I think that there are people at home who maybe don't attend this type of event who may be thinking, well, potentially they have a point. Maybe they think that all these people actually are making themselves heard and they're defending our community. And I think that when you have a strong left, when you have a strong, organized working class, then there is opportunities for alternatives. There's opportunities for people to understand that the issues that we have in our society around, failing public services, around lack of housing, around, austerity and all of these issues, this is not something that is the fault of a relatively small number of people who come to the UK to claim asylum every year. And that's an argument that we unfortunately just need to keep making over and over again, that this is very convenient for the government, for the Tories, and potentially also for the Labour Party to say that that this is the fault of these people over there. This is why you are suffering. This is why the community that you live in is, you know, falling apart. It's because of those people there, and we just need to keep saying that it's not, and that, you know, people who come here to claim asylum, people who are seeking refuge, they are part of our communities. They are people that, you know, are our friends. They're people who give back to society, and we just need to be able to provide a system in which they are able to rebuild their lives here and to be able to go on and you know, be part of our communities rather than stuck in hotels in wherever all over the country, you know, waiting for years for a decision for claim. Yeah.
What do you think kind of just strategy from here on in is? I mean, maybe a kind of introduce a slightly hopeful element in this is that if you look at the polling, attitudes towards immigration as a general catch-all term, I suppose, have actually improved quite significantly, even though immigration is actually higher now than it has ever been. So there's no, I mean, the Financial Times did an interesting study on this, which showed there is no correlation, direct correlation between levels of immigration and anti-immigration hostility, but there is a correlation between negative press reports about migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and negative sentiment. So I think that's, you know, perhaps not surprising, but it's quite interesting to have the data fleshed out. So, I mean, as I say, you know, there has been that positive development, because actually, if you look back in the earlier 2010s, there was far more visceral, I would say, public hostility on the issue, which came to the fore very much in the referendum campaign, if we're honest about it. So what do you think? I mean, there is something to work with, I think, maybe?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the enemy for the Tories, it's constantly changing, and they, you know, previously it was the EU, and that represented, you know, as we saw with Nigel Farage and standing in front of his big poster, that represented uncontrolled migration. Then it was immigrants, and now it's sort of back to being about asylum seekers, as it was, I think, previously in the early 2000s. And I think that issue of, you know, the way in which it's been framed by this government, by the Home Secretary, by much of the press, as these are people who don't deserve or don't need protection because they're not who they say they are. I think that just needs to keep being unpicked, and we just need to keep saying that, you know, having voices like Kolbassia's voice, allowing opportunities for people to be heard. And, you know, sometimes I just think that, you know, I have some of the most important and strongest relationships I've had in my life have been with people that I have met who have not come from this country and who've come here to seek asylum and to rebuild their lives. And I think that if more people were able to just know those people in their communities who have those backgrounds, to invite them to be part of their lives and to learn from them, I think it would be enriching for all of us. You know, it's been one of the blessings for me of working in this sector and working with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, is just how much those young people that I've known are just so inspiring and so you know, so special, I guess, and just in the ways in which that our community can be enriched by that. I just think that's the message that we need to give to people, is that people like Kolbassia have, we've got something to learn from them. We've got something that we can understand about ourselves. And I think that it's a blessing for us, maybe, that we've never been in a situation in this country where there's a war, where there is conflict for some time now, rather. And that means that we haven't had to be in that situation, but it could happen to us. You know, it could be any of us one day. Yeah.
Amen. Benny, honestly, it's such an honor to have you and explain that in such clear, lucid terms. Do follow Benny on social media. It's three N's, isn't it? BE3NSYH.
Yeah, I think they didn't have my name when I was making my Twitter account at the time.
Well, it could be worse because I got my Twitter account in 2009 and Owen Jones had been taken, so I did 84, and at the time it was like, it's fine. Now as I get older, the 84 just becomes a kind of
ever approaching.
Yeah. Now it's just like, oh, he's getting really old.
I think you're some way off 84 yet, Owen.
Actually, just before you go, actually, so David Baratin wants to, he's just saying the Tories' attitude towards any minority is basically psychopathic, but what about Labour's position? Reeves comes across as cruel as brotherment. Just what your thoughts just on where Labour at finally? Sorry, I should have asked that actually.
Yeah, I think that they're playing this ridiculous game at the moment where they're trying to position themselves on both sides, which doesn't work, where they're saying, you know, we disagree with the Rwanda plan, we believe in human rights, we believe that people should be able to seek sanctuary, and at the same time, you know, attacking the Tories for not having done enough to stop the boats. You know, Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, kind of pushing this line of, you know, why aren't you doing more? You know, should we be giving to the National Crime Agency? Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? To kind of stop people being able to seek sanctuary in the UK. And I think that in itself fans these flames that have created this situation. And so obviously, I think that the far right rhetoric primarily comes from the government and the Tories. And you don't see the overt xenophobia at the moment from the Labour front bench, but I think the positioning of this issue is very different from what we may have seen under, you know, Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party, attending a Refugees Are Welcome protest as his first step as leader of the Labour Party, rather. Yeah. I do worry that that they will just drift further right before the election in an attempt to sort of bring in this particular demographic that they think that they can reach with that messaging. So I think we just have to wait and see if this gets worse. Hopefully there are voices within the Labour movement, but also within the Parliamentary Labour Party. You can stand up and say that this is not the right message and that we need to be specifically attacking the Tories on their rhetoric, on their policy as it comes to immigration and asylum.
Absolutely. Benny, thanks so much for just adding that right at the end. I think it is important we scrutinise the opposition, given they're the very likely government in waiting. They're likely to win the election next year. So I think scrutinising them is really important. Cheers, Benny. Really, really appreciate it. And speak to you soon. Great stuff from Benny. Really, really appreciate having him on with his expertise, insight and humanity, which is the one thing that's lacking in this so-called discussion. I just want to see, I can see this comment. Someone on Facebook keeps leaving this message, Georgina. Hi, Georgina. Which is an attempt to justify what happened on Friday by the allegations of someone who happened to be an asylum seeker approaching an underage girl. You see, Georgina, I don't quite understand what point you're trying to make here, because if you thought about it long enough and you had basic humanity, and this is an attempt to appeal to your basic humanity, you understand how unreasonable it is to collectively blame an entire group for the actions of one person. You would, in the abstract, surely you understand that you don't, that if someone is Muslim or Jewish or Hindu, for example, and they committed a terrible crime or attempted to commit a crime, you wouldn't, I would hope, would you blame all Hindus, Jews or Muslims for the actions of that one individual? Because clearly terrible things are committed by people from every single possible background imaginable. People called Georgina commit terrible acts, but you probably wouldn't want to be held collectively responsible for what they do either. It is an absolute nonsense used throughout history to justify discrimination and bigotry, which is you take extreme acts allegedly committed by an individual with a certain attribute, and then you blame every single person with that attribute as though they're all collectively responsible. I mean, Georgina, Britain has committed horrible crimes all over the world. The Iraq War, for example, in which hundreds of thousands of Arabs were slaughtered in barbaric fashion. I don't happen to know your position on the Iraq War. I marched against it over and over again. Now, you would probably not want to be held collectively responsible for what that particular crime was, even though there's a stronger argument for it because it was an elected government responsible for that particular heinous crime. And it's obviously a violation of basic humanity to inflict collective punishment on an entire group because of the actions of one particular individual, which is what you are spamming my comment section arguing for. Now, you are either stupid, to be honest, and you probably don't like me being quite that direct, or bigoted. In either case, it's not an excuse. And I would suggest that you would reassess how you look at the world if you think it's a reasonable position to have that you blame an entire group for the actions of a particular individual, which is what was used to justify, as I've already said, racism against Black people in the United States. It was literally the founding basis of the KKK to protect our women from the threat of Black people, which is what you're now trying to do in terms of asylum seekers. Now, in terms of just generally, I think it's important just to talk about, before I finish, in terms of the reality of refugees and asylum seekers, because obviously there's this focus on the issue of small boats and the increase in numbers arriving through small boats. And it's really important to make the point that there were far fewer or significantly fewer asylum claims in the early 2000s than there are now. And why is that? So why is it there were more people claiming asylum at the beginning of the 2000s than there are now, but now there's this focus on small boats? Because what happened is there was the legal and safe routes were clamped down on. So even though there were fewer asylum seekers coming to this country, they're coming through the only means possible because the safe and legal routes have been closed down. Even though this country is directly complicit in many of the reasons that people are forced to flee their homes. Take Afghanistan. Now, there are Afghan refugees. I met Afghan refugees in the old camp in Calais, including one teenager who watched his father be shot dead by the Taliban. Now, our country was involved in that conflict for 2 decades, and I'm afraid to say committed some pretty gruesome acts in which civilians were killed, which I'm afraid is one of the reasons the Taliban came back to power, because they exploited some of the resentment against the Western forces involved in that conflict. Now, I would say we have a responsibility towards Afghanistan and its people because of our direct involvement. And the West more generally, given they made the slightly unfortunate decision to fund the Mujahideen in the 1980s and portray them as freedom fighters. Well, that ended well, didn't it? As well as Saudi Arabia, a key Western ally, funneling support through the most extreme elements of that Mujahideen. That ended well as well, didn't it? So we have this responsibility, or Saudis at the moment, speaking of which, carpet bombing Yemen with British bombs, to take in refugees. But we take, firstly, in terms of the West, so the countries most responsible for supporting dictatorships and wars across the world, they take in only 14% of the world's refugee population. So refugees are far more likely to be in the poorest countries with the least resources to look after those refugees. And if you look at Britain compared to those other Western countries who aren't doing their bit, Britain takes in significantly fewer refugees than, say, France, let alone Germany or Italy. And then people say, oh, well, they should just claim asylum in the first safe country. Not how it works. That isn't actually what international dictates. But you're also saying only Italy should, essentially, only Italy should take in refugees. Nobody else should, because when they arrive in Italy, That's a safe country, rah, rah, rah. The reason we get the very small minority of the global refugee population who arrive here is generally speaking because they speak English and or have community ties, people who live here. Obviously, if you ended up in a country where you didn't speak the language and next door there was a country where you did, you would do everything possible to go to the country where you spoke the language because you would have a much better chance of having a secure future for you and for your family. It's just obvious common sense. And again, when I went to the Calais refugee camp, the people I met spoke extremely fluent English. That's why they were coming to England. That's why they didn't speak any French. They had very little means of living in a country where they didn't speak the language or have cultural ties or familial ties or all the rest of it. I just think these points are worth making. Sad Cantwell, the growing youth discontent on the government hopefully won't be redirected towards migrants and other minorities. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, obviously, that younger people, obviously, huge amounts of discontent with the government. But in this country, they're much more likely to be supportive of migrants and refugees. That doesn't mean racism doesn't exist amongst younger people. It does. But I have to say, if you compare to France, I'm afraid to say there is large youth support for the far right in France, for Marine Le Pen, for her the national rally, Rassemblement National, which the party she represents. So you don't take it for granted. But in America and Britain, interestingly, youth sympathy for far-right extremism and the right generally is much lower. And there is far more natural support. Obviously, younger people, particularly in urban areas, to be fair, are more likely to grow up with migrants and refugees than has ever been the case before. So they're often embedded in their social networks. And that is, for the reasons Benny said, that obviously if you know people from different backgrounds, including refugees and migrants, and they're humanized, aren't they? And then when you see their humanity, you're far less likely often to be bigoted and prejudiced towards them. Just to respond to Georgina again, I don't know why I'm doing this, but she says, I'm not justifying it, but it explains a lot. As a Scout's daughter of an immigrant, it doesn't matter that you're the daughter of an immigrant, Georgina. I'm not actually that interested. It actually makes your position worse because I don't know. I'm looking at your last name. I would suggest looking at your last name, I think maybe Georgian heritage. Okay. So if a Georgian, because you're saying, I'm not justifying it, which you're talking about a particular asylum seeker who's alleged to have approached a 15-year-old girl. I'm not justifying it, but explains a lot as a Scout's daughter of an immigrant. So if a Georgian guy, someone who was from Georgian heritage and approached a 15-year-old girl and then people started rioting over the presence of Georgians, what would you say to that? Do you think that would be, do you think that would explain it, would you say? If you got personally targeted, if someone came up to you as a Georgian and started menacing you on the basis that some other Georgian had done something bad, would you think, and if someone said, well, Georgina, I'm not justifying it, but it explains a lot. Another Georgian, someone of Georgian heritage did do a very bad thing. So actually you can see why this person's angry with you. You wouldn't think that, would you? Because you're not completely stupid, Georgina. I'm really I'm doing my best here. I think it's important not to patronize you and to try and appeal to some basic rationality. And you said your kids are Algerian. Not interested. Not interested. It makes your position worse. And I'm using Georgina here as a prop. Sorry, Georgina, because this is a stupid argument, which is the basis of prejudice and bigotry, which is that you extrapolate actions by a particular individual to target an entire group. That's what's happened. That's what happened towards Black people traditionally and still does. Muslims, migrants, refugees, trans people. It's always the same. And that there is no excuse for people using acts committed by one particular individual in order to target an entire group. I don't care, Georgina, about your heritage. As I've said, it just makes your position worse. Just going to make that clear. Cool. Do press like and do press subscribe. We have videos throughout the week, obviously. I thought this was important to talk about because, you know, the threat of the far right is very real. And, you know, this government, I think, will become, well, it is becoming increasingly desperate, isn't it? Because look at the state of it, guys. It's an absolute state. And therefore, it's in their interest to press a big red shiny button, which is make people angry with refugees and migrants. That's what they'll do. As people's wages decline, their living standards fall, as people suffer for collapsing public services like the National Health Service, you know, as their social services and, you know, the welfare state are hacked away, make people angry with refugees and migrants instead. That's what this government is intending to do. So I think it's very important that we talk about this. And focus on this particular menace, given the complicity of the British media and the British political elite, because they're playing with fire. And we can see what happened in Knowsley, and things could get a lot worse than that. We've seen, as Benny said, for example, the petrol bombing of a migrant processing centre, and we have seen acts of far-right violence which have led to death. So this is something that we do need to talk about, given the complicity of our elites. I just want to say thank you to FSM's Dog, Tarani Amadi Parker, Nick the Peasant Reacts, and of course David Browter for your sorry David, I know your name, just tripping over. As ever, for your support. Do keep the show on the road on patreon.com/OwenJones84. So we're working on this documentary this month, but we need to decide what it is based on the submissions that have been made. So we'll get on that. We'll have videos pretty much every day this week as normal. And also listen to us on the podcast as well. But yeah, thanks so much again to both our brilliant guests who were full of humanity. And let's all be aware of the continued threat of the far right, which is a menace, and do everything we can to fight back. Cool. Cheers, everyone. Hope you're having a great Sunday or whichever day you're listening to this. And I will see you very soon. See ya.